in 1993 with a secondary education major. He has held teaching licenses in Michigan and Indiana and continues to study history and the effects on the present. Paul completed ASTD's Blended Living Certificate Program in 2012, and he's a certified youth mental health first aid trainer and oversees community health worker training program. Paul has been presenting on the topic of generational differences in the workplace for over 6 years. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Paul, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Angie, and I'm not seeing the slideshow yet, but and that was Central Michigan University, not high school, but that's okay. I want to welcome everybody to this presentation. As Angie said, this is a presentation that has been evolving for over 6 years. I started teaching on this topic some time ago, and I can see the tie-in with my interest in history as the generations enter the workforce, and some of them are starting to leave the workforce. So that's my personal interest in this topic, and it's become kind of a passion. This is the first time I've presented this particular presentation, but I say that every time because this is constantly evolving as new people enter the workforce and others leave, and as the data changes and we find out more. It's definitely a very interesting topic, and I hope that I'm going to bring some new information to those of you who may study this project. So I call this Leading the Millennial and Beyond Generation. So we're going to talk about how the 5 generations interact and how to avoid conflicts, and a lot of that has to do with what I call generational competence. We're going to talk about strategies for dealing with all these different folks in the workforce, talk about what motivates the generations, learn strategies to help particularly retain millennials, and you'll see why I say that, retain millennials, because a lot of our managers or our older employees are boomers, and there's definitely some differences there, and we'll get into those differences. But then also, very important, the last point there is not to bash any one generation, because that doesn't get anybody anywhere, so we're not going to do that. And as Angie said, if you have questions, please either type them in the chat box or, go ahead and voice your questions, and I'll answer them as well as I can. So first we're going to cover demographics, and I want to do some definitions. We probably all know this, but a generation, group of people who share a place and time in history, about 20 years in length, that have experiences in common. This is important because their values and attitudes in the workplace are usually the same, and that's also where we run into some of our conflict. And I'm going to move through some of this material fairly quickly because I know we have limited time, and if given the chance, I can talk about this forever. We're going to brand the generations, and some of these terms may be new, and I'm going to explain why I use the terms I use. First of all, you can see on this slide we have the different names of the generations. First of all are the traditionalists, and those are folks born 1922 to 1945. In 2016, they range in age from 71 to 87. Then we have the baby boomers, and they're 46 to 64. Their ages 52 to 70 this year. Then we have Gen X, 65 to 79, and they're 35 to 51. And then we have millennials, and this might be new for some of you. This is one of those things that's in flux. When I first started doing this training several years ago, millennials were 1980 to 2002, but most of the published research seems to have changed. So I'm going to stick with the new research, 1980 to 1985, and they're 36 to 21. And then finally globals, and they're 1996 and later, and you can see under that the size of each generation. Also listed some of the other names you might have heard the generations by, and in my training, as I said, I don't want to pick on any one generation, and some of the names for the other generations might be considered a little bit have negative connotations, and I tried to go with generally accepted names that were kind of neutral as far as the generations. You may have heard millennials referred to as Generation Y, and globals referred to as Generation Z. But most of the research, and I do read on this topic quite extensively, those terms are usually used by boomers or maybe older Gen Xers. Most of the millennial and globals don't refer to themselves that way. So I decided to go with the terms that some of the generations use for themselves. I hope some of this is new information for you. You can call them whatever you'd like. Millennials and globals are definitely not derogatory terms, although sometimes if you read articles and you kind of get that feeling, it's kind of like millennials are used like in the olden days, which dates myself, and I'll tell you how old I am in a minute. You probably figured that out from my bio. But use the term young whippersnapper. They use that in regards to the term millennials, and so let's not do that. So, quick poll. Angie, are you ready? What generation are you? And I'd like to see, and I'm going to take it to. We'll see if the demographics shift out like they usually do. That's definitely a global area.
Yeah, we are getting some background noise. If anyone does not have their line on mute, if you could please mute your line, that would be great. Thank you.
What is the mute?
Okay. You get it? Oh. All right. Well, it was shifting around there a little bit, but it looks like it's close. Usually I see a lot of boomers and a lot of millennials when I do this. But this is the way it's trending. The last time I did this presentation or similar presentation, I actually got a lot more Gen Xers. Matter of fact, the majority of them were Gen Xers and millennials. So very interesting. Thank you, Angie. I'm going to go ahead and end that. You're going to do it for me. Excellent. So as you couldn't see my response, but I am a boomer. And when we talk about traits here in a few minutes, there's a lot of research out there. There's what they call cuspers, and cuspers are those people that are right on the edge, and that's actually what I am. I was born in 1961, so I am considered a cusper, and I have a lot of the characteristics of Gen X, for example. So, and there's also differences when we talk about characteristics in urban and rural. So, as I said, we only have an hour, so I can't get into all that. But that was interesting, and that the attendance on this webinar seems to reflect the general trends in the workplace, which is always good. So why do we care anyway? You're the boss, and I do this for a lot of executive type folks, and I'm the boss. It's my workplace. They need to get with the program. Back in my day, we had 9 planets. So, well, here's why. By 2025, millennials, and with that globals too, will make up 75% of the world's workforce. So I made this slide, this graphic, and it's the train is coming, so you need to jump on or get out of the way. And as we'll see in the next few slides, a lot of people have decided to get out of the way. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but there's also some consequences involved in that. So take a minute and think about that, and that statistic came from Forbes. This is another one, and I found this one very recently, the workforce of today and tomorrow. And this is from 2015, and it's very similar for today, but I found this to be very interesting. And last year, millennials made up 45% of the workforce, Gen Xers 21, and boomers 31. By 2020, they're going to make up 50% of the workforce, so that's up 5. And as you can see, Gen Xers, boomers, and traditional generation are going to drop off considerably. So it's important for us, particularly if we're not millennials, to understand how the millennial and the global mind works, because, like it or not, there's more of them than there are of us. And this slide breaks it down a little bit further for those of you who like a lot of numbers, basically verbalizing that last slide. But I thought the one that this is one I just updated on some new statistics. By 2016, globals are going to be 20% of the workforce by 2020. millennials are going to be 50% of the workforce in 2020. So 70% of the workforce is not going to be boomers. So if you're a boomer, you can understand why that's why this is important. This is the other thing, and millennials, everybody really needs to be aware of this, is that 70 million boomers are going to retire in the next decade. Okay? I'm going to hopefully be one of those people. All right? I thought this was interesting. 10,000 boomers are reaching retirement age every day through 2020. And this last bullet point, and this could be any of you, and it does affect, any operation, nonprofit, business, whatever, it should affect your planning, is that 48% of companies don't have any strategic planning in place to address this huge exodus of institutional knowledge that's going to happen when the boomers retire. All right? This is something that millennials who are going to start moving into these positions of management, you need to be aware that you might not like all the old people, but some of us know a few things about how things go. So even if it's going to change, it's something we want to keep in mind. All right. Any questions about any of those numbers? I don't know if anybody's seen all that, but usually that's a big eye opener for folks. No? Okay. So let's take a few minutes and talk about distinguishing characteristics of the different generations. And as a PowerPoint trainer, this slide goes against what I usually teach, but every once in a while you just got to put a lot of information on a slide. So hopefully you have a handout, or you can access a handout, blow this up, make it a little bit better. This actually is kind of a unique chart in that I took a lot of information from a lot of different graphics and charts and kind of compiled it into one big chart, and you can see where I got all my information on the last slide there. But some of these things, and I'm not going to go through them all, but some of the major shifts I think that we've seen in the workplace we can talk about here. For example, when we talk about workplace values, nowhere do you see there that all generations don't have good workplace values, but one of our areas of conflict is how each generation looks at the workforce, or workplace, excuse me. And the one that I want to talk about is the shift between baby boomers and millennials, and actually some Gen Xers there too. Baby boomers, a lot, and obviously there's differences, but a lot of them focused on the workplace as their anchor. That was why they were there. They invented, as you see down at the bottom, they invented the 50-hour work week. I remember when I first started working in corporate America, it was all about face time, and you did not want to be the first person to leave. Even if you didn't have anything to do, you wanted to hang around because it just looked bad. Okay, then the Gen Xers came around, and this is where I was all in agreement with the Gen Xers, started to get a clear balance between the work and the family, and their work ethic is like, you don't need a 10-hour work day, all right? And then the millennials came around, and I think this is interesting, and I read this just recently, the workplace as a gig concept. I don't know if anybody's heard that one, but that your job is, the job you have right now is just going to be one of a series of shorter engagements that you're going to experience throughout your career. The days of working 25 years for a company, retiring with your pension and getting your gold watch is long gone. But the gig mentality, okay, I think that's very interesting. Also, the millennials really believe that they can work anywhere, anytime, and should be valued on work product, not when it was done. And that, as you can, when you look over at baby boomers and how they look at the workplace, that is a huge conflict point. And each side can actually argue some things logically about their opinions on this, but just that statement in and of itself is a huge conflict point. I'm not going to give you my opinion on that, but got to remember I'm a cusper, so I'm more towards Gen X. And then we have the globals, and they're kind of new, and I don't have a ton of information on them because they haven't been in the workplace that long, and for the most part, most of them have not reached management positions. But what I find interesting about the globals is their use of technology. And if you look across the chart there, you can see that for them, technology is critical for their job. And the term the Internet of Everything, I think most people have probably heard that, and that's, that everything is interconnected, that your refrigerator can tell you how cold it is. Some of us, some of the stuff that's kind of breaking out is, I have an app on my phone that I can mess with my thermostat at home, the Internet of Everything. So for them, that's critical. There's also some things about workplace view on authority, and with the traditionalists, boomers, and some older Gen Xers, time equals authority, and that's a big thing. But for the millennials and the globals, it's more about you have to earn respect. It's not about punching. It's not, you don't get my respect just because you managed to hang on for 15 years. And again, that's another conflict point. So just those are some of the highlights of that slide. As I said, take some time and look at that one a little more in depth, because I know we're tight on time. So April 25th, 2016, headline, Pew Research Center says, millennials overtake baby boomers as America's largest, and of course this is living generation, America's largest living generation. This is huge because for quite a few years, that was boomers. And that also is one of our conflict points. They've been the #1 generation for a long time and used to having it their way, and I'll get one more depth later. Oh, and also, by the way, the younger generations are not the devil. So they're just younger. That's some humor there. All right. I'm going to move on to generational conflicts. I've kind of alluded to this, but the generations that seem to be clashing the most are the boomers and the millennials. And this is a huge deal. And it's funny, I've read quite a few articles recently about, and this is some research that is changing, and I'll go into that in a minute, but there's industries that have been built up around, helping boomers understand millennials. And so there's a lot of theories here. And I think some of it is due to a disconnect between, as I say here, between each generation's work processes or how they view work, because that's a real thing. But I also think, and this is the next slide, and more research is coming out that kind of bears this up, and it was kind of nice to be vindicated because I've been preaching this for a couple of years now, and then I finally read it, an article written by somebody with a lot more letters after their name than me, and basically said, you know what? Sometimes it's just because it's older people and younger people, and throughout time, older people and younger people seem to have different ideas on how things should be done. Is that a surprise to anyone? Probably not. So it's interesting. And also, one of the complaints that boomer bosses seem to have with millennials is that they move around a lot. But one of the articles I read, and this came from the Atlantic, is that any employee under the age of 35 are more likely to move on to new opportunities than their older coworkers, and that has been the case statistically for the last 20 years. What the difference is now is that there's a lot more younger workers. Okay, think about it. When the majority of your workforce was boomers, they weren't moving around as much. Well, now you got a lot more young workers, and young workers move, and they always have. So this is really not new stuff. And when you look at it this way, you've got your baby boomers, and their average age is most bosses, and this is most bosses statistically, 52 to 70, and then you've got this huge amount, and sorry Gen Xers, I'm leaving you out, then you've got this huge amount of millennials who are 21 to 36. Take a second and look at that, and you can when you look at it this way, it's like, oh yeah, I can see part of the problem. There's a huge gap here, and there's a whole bunch of baby boomers, and there's a whole bunch of millennials, and they're going to conflict. And I say this, if you're a boomer, think about, like myself, and I'll just pick on me. I think back to when I was 21 and what my goals were and what I thought and my ambitions and those kind of things compared to what they are now. And then I put the question to millennials, think about what your goals might be in 20 years and what would change. And I use this, the hashtag adulting, which is an interesting thing that term has come up, and being more of an adult, and that's I thought that hashtag was kind of humorous. So think about that. It's more, a lot of it is about stage of life, okay? Then it might be, some of it might be about stage of life rather than some huge kind of deep thinking thing about how one generation works harder than the other. There we go. One of the other clash points we do have is in communication. And we need to, as whatever generation you are, and from a leadership standpoint, we need to understand how each generation prefers to communicate. We can spend a lot of time, and I do trainings on communication just generally, we can spend a lot of time trying to force people to communicate the way that's most comfortable for us because we're the boss, but is that really the best path? And so I break this down by different generations on how research shows that they prefer to communicate. As may be expected, traditionalists prefer written, formal communication. Not a lot of feedback, and we think about how, if you think back, you got your review once a year, and if you didn't want to hear much more than that. Baby boomers, they prefer a little bit more personal verbal feedback, again, or communication with, again, that same infrequent feedback. Then we get to the Gen Xers, and this is the first generation really that kind of started to grow up with computers and those kind of things. So they do like electronic communication, emails, frequent feedback. Millennials even more, and when you think texting, you think tweets, they want electronic feedback. They want it right now because that's what they're used to. Because they, a lot of millennials communicate electronically, and so that's instantaneous. Good, bad, different, I don't know, but that's what they expect. Global, some of the research, and I thought this was interesting, they communicate with each other electronically and in real time a lot, but what the studies are starting to show is that at work, in the workplace, they prefer verbal communication, which is I found to be interesting. I have not been able to find out the reason behind that, but studies are showing that the globals personally communicate with each other electronically, but prefer personal verbal communication in the workplace. But again, immediate feedback because they grew up with immediate feedback. All right, so and that's a brief thing on communication. I teach a whole class on that, but we have your 5 generations. Each has their preferred style of communicating, and it is your job to find out. It's all about the channel. Do you want to force somebody into what's comfortable for you, or do you really want to get your message across? And that's why I always say, you need, as somebody in charge of millennials or working with millennials, and if your customer base or whoever it is, your grantees, these kind of things are millennials, it doesn't do any good. And we found that in the ARC program with many of the things that we're doing. We had to change the channel in which we were going to communicate, or the mode of which our communication mode, because we found that it wasn't being effective. So do you want to be effective, or do you want to try to force people into your comfort zone? Step outside. And there's some other differences. And this is one, and I kind of came up with this a couple of years ago, and I took my history background into play, put my history training into play here, and I kind of like music, as a lot of people do. And I thought about the rate of change. Everybody says change is painful, and it is. But millennials and globals are used to a much, much, much faster range than boomers, and think phone upgrades. In this chart, I used to do a whole thing where I'd quiz people on these different things. But what we have on this slide is basically, it's music, because most people listen to music. And that thing in the top, that cylindrical, there we go, cylindrical thing up in the upper left-hand corner is actually an Edison recording that was one of the first kind of music recordings that we had. And we move all the way through LP records, 8-track tapes, cassettes, CDs, and then finally the very first, and that is a picture of the very first iPod. And the very first iPod had a 5-gigabyte hard drive that was capable of storing about 1,000 songs, okay? And the only thing it did was play music. And to go from the very first recorded music to that particular device took roughly 90 years, okay? And so that's the rate of change that most traditionalist boomers and even older Gen Xers are kind of used to, you know? It's kind of slow, but it was radical. You know, I remember when each one of those things came out. Well, except the Edison thing, I'm not that old. But, you know, it was a big deal. Well, then we look down at the next phase, and this is the phase that our millennials and our globals grew up with. That first iPod to the iPhone 7, okay? The iPhone 7 has a 256 gigabyte hard drive and does about everything. It is, you know, it could be considered definitely a computer, and, you know, 15 years ago probably would have been considered a supercomputer. And that's what millennials and globals carry around in their pocket always. And they're used to turning them in every 2 years. I know, for me, that's annoying. They wait in line, okay? So that is a huge, huge difference between boomers and our younger generation. Technology in general, and this is the thing. They grew up, I love this picture, they grew up with technology and information, be it good or be it bad, at their fingertips, okay? They can and do fact-check things. So if the boss says something in a meeting, they can get on their smartphone sitting in the back of the room and check to see if what he or she said was correct according to the internet. And they use ways to communicate and use technology in ways to communicate that make a lot of boomers feel uncomfortable. I still see that where I have people working for me that are millennials, and you know, they're texting. Well, I don't know if they're texting a friend or it's a work-related thing, and you know, I have good people, so I'm assuming that it's a work-related thing. But that's just the way they communicate, both professionally and socially. So that makes a lot of boomers feel uncomfortable. Also because some boomers aren't comfortable with the technology. It's getting better, but they're not comfortable with the technology in general. Okay. There are similarities. So this is the good news, all right? This was a study, and granted it's a small sample, but I always try to look for positives too. You can see the breakdown. When we look at want to make a positive impact on my organization, the numbers are pretty much the same. Millennials 25, Xers 21, and Boomers 23. Help solve social challenges, again, right across the board, very similar. Didn't put globals on here because they haven't haven't had a chance to survey them. And work with a diverse group of people, Millennials, Xers, and Boomers, again, pretty much the same. So I think that that's good, okay? It's a multi-generational study, and we have a lot of things in common. So we don't want to just don't want to focus on the differences. Let's look for this, what we have that's the same. All right. Talk about motivation at work. This is based on a lot of research, and I'm always open for, and I want to just say that again, if you see something that you don't agree with, don't yell at me. But if you want to put it in the chat box or discuss it, that is fine. This is, again, based on several articles. Just some definitions. Monetary benefits are what you would think. Some examples of bonuses, money, profit sharing, stock, those kind of things. Non-monetary benefits, things that, based on their life, like flexible work hours, which is kind of monetary in a way, but training, travel, experiential rewards. I thought this to badges, gift cards, and merchandise. And badges that's what those are, by the way. They're gamer badges down the corner. That one was kind of surprising, but okay, I'll go with it. Try to keep an open mind. So traditionalists, and these are kind of black and white, and obviously there's nuances to all these, and this is just based on a lot of the basic research, but traditionalists are motivated by money. Got to remember when a lot of these folks grow up, we're talking about people with the Great Depression, and that's simply one of their biggest motivators. Not all of it, but some of it. Non-monetary motivational factors are respected. They do have a desire to lead. They still want to make an impact and also want to continue to add value to society and the organization. And if you still have, and some people do, still have traditionalists in the workforce, particularly in leadership positions, they're there because they want to add value to hopefully society and the organization. Now, hopefully they're not there because they absolutely have to be, but the fact that they want to be productive individuals. For boomers, they tend to be motivated more by money, and then things like flexible retirement, those kind of things, they are also motivated. Got to remember, this is the generation that invented, as I said before, the 50-hour work week, so they like public recognition. They want to be leaders, have subordinates, promotion, recognition, and some control. They like things like 401ks and sabbaticals and catch-up retirement funding, that kind of stuff. Then we talk about Generation X. They are now getting older, so they also like, as far as monetary, bonuses, stock options, those kind of things, if it's a for-profit kind of company. But they are the ones that are starting to get more flexible. They want a flexible workplace culture. They do want feedback from their boss or their superiors, and they're also very goal-oriented. So meeting workplace goals is one of those things that motivates Generation X. Millennials. This is the generation, and this does not mean they are lazy at all, but they would like more time off. Skills training is huge, and we'll talk about that more. Travel and flexible schedules, all right? Again, this is the generation, if we were to go back that slide, that wants major work-life balance and flexibility. And it's not because they're going home to sit around. A lot of them are really involved in social causes or volunteerism and those kind of things, not to say the other generations aren't, but this generation tends to have more of that. Some of the things that motivates them, as many of them are younger, mentoring, being mentored, not necessarily being a mentor also, but being a mentee. This generation responds very well to having a good mentor. They also like recognition and those experiential rewards, things that they can do. This is the generation, and statistically, I don't have this in the slideshow, but they don't save as much money because they want to experience things. Now, they all are also younger, and when I was younger, I didn't save as much money either. So, but they do like to experience things. The millennials aren't going to be really impressed with a 401k plan, most of them. So, then the globals, and this is all new stuff, and this will probably change in 6 months. But what I was able to find was they like even more time off. And a lot of times that's not even paid time off, and the same with the millennials. They just have things they need to do. They do want non-monetary, meaningful work, constant feedback, and that's not because they're needy. It's just because they're used to having it. When you tweet and 10 people respond to your tweet or respond to your Facebook post or your Snapchat or whatever it is that you're using, and who knows what's going to be around in 6 months, it's instantaneous, okay? They like experiential rewards also, badges and those kind of things. And if anybody can explain that to me, that would be awesome. And also access to technology. As I said in that big chart, that for this generation, technology is critical. And, I've found that to be one of the tough things for boomer bosses to buy into, because, and I've been in my other one of my other titles is IT director here at Aspen, and I've been in the IT world and was a Microsoft certified technical trainer years ago, is that, it was always, you were always told to adopt technology slowly because it was expensive and you didn't want to pick the wrong thing. The problem is we can't do that anymore because it's all different in 2 years, and that is a huge deal with a lot of boomers. And so for you millennials, you have to remember that if you're getting pushback from somebody above you or your board or whatever about new technology purchases, you have to remember how their shared experience was. Technology used to be a lot more expensive, and we had there were some people that when you were a leader, cutting edge technology adopter, you could get burned. And ask anybody about Betamax tapes, and I won't go into that. So technology is critical to the globals. Okay. Retaining millennials. Some general strategies. The United States Bureau of Labor Statistics, and you probably experienced this, millennials will stay on average of about 2 years, and the number one reason they leave is lack of opportunities, okay? Nearly a third of companies lost 15% or more of their young talent in just the past year, and most of those, out of those companies, they felt that they went to a competitor in the same thing. But remember that people under 35 for the last 20 plus years have been changing jobs more frequently, and they don't have a lot of loyalty to their organization. So if you're not giving them what they need, they promote themselves by going to a different company because there is no loyalty really. For the millennial, work-life and global, most of this goes for globals too. Work-life balance, I thought that was interesting. Training, new training. Second place is flexible work hours, and then cash comes in at third. And I thought this is a Price Waterhouse study from a couple years ago. As I said, I try to keep all this stuff up to date. I found that interesting. So a chance to advance their careers by learning and skills, flexible work hours, and then cash bonuses are third. So if you're a boomer, don't think that just by paying them more they're going to stay, because they probably won't. You need to get flexible. I like that. Get flexible. And I'll tend to agree with this. I mean, if they don't want to spend every hour in the office. If they can get their stuff done at home, they don't. Most millennials, and I have to agree with that. And in many cases, the technology that millennials have at home is better than the technology they have at work. So why should I work on a 4-year-old desktop when I have a fire-breathing tablet at home, or I can work with my laptop hooked to my 60-inch TV and have a ginormous screen that I can look at, and I'm going to have another window open where I got a game going or something. So as long as they're getting the work done, that's key. They don't think they should be home, or at work. I'm sorry. And I like this last point too. Just as this was a survey that was done not too long ago, that this is a concept that's catching on, that 50% of all working adults would like to find a job that offers more flexibility. This is a trend. I mean, if you look around, I don't know how it is in all your places, but here at Aspen, for example, the building we were before was at one time, and this was a large, 7-story office building, was at one time owned and occupied by an insurance company that had the whole building. By the time we moved in, they were down to 3 floors. They virtualized their workforce about the same time we were looking for new office space, and they were moving to smaller, they were completely moving out of that building, and they were moving to a smaller building, and our office manager talked to their office manager and basically said, we really don't even need to have an office, but our boomer bosses wouldn't know what to do if they didn't have an office to go to. And I thought that was pretty interesting. So that is a trend that will only continue to grow, I believe. Okay. You need to support employee growth, and again, they'll leave if they find an organization that has better opportunities. And I think this is true in any industry, profit or nonprofit. And if they feel like they're dead-ended out, they'll just go look for somebody else that'll give them more opportunities. You need to give them purpose also. Now, for the nonprofit world, this is one of those things that we do have going for us, as most of our nonprofits are purpose-driven organizations anyway, so that's nice for us. But this generation is attuned to the world around them, and they care deeply about the environment, civil rights, social justice causes, those kind of things. So, and being a socially responsible company, and this goes for the for-profit world in particular, and this is in one of my other slideshows, but that is a huge deal when you're graduating from college, that many people would take less money to work for a socially responsible organization than more money to work for, one that's not so much. So when millennials are looking for their job, looking around for a job, these are some of the questions that I've found that they ask themselves. Is this a winning organization they can be proud of? Can I maximize my performance on the job? Are people treated well, both economically and interpersonally, which is a word I never used before. So they want to be treated fairly. And is the work itself fulfilling and enjoyable? And they just don't want to be a wage slave and don't want to do a lousy job for but even though it pays well. And there was a time when it was all about, you graduate from college, you try to find the biggest job you can get with the biggest paycheck, and sure, you had to work 60, 70 hours, but that was okay because you measured your success by the size of your paycheck and what kind of car you drove. And I don't think that's necessarily the highest motivating factor anymore. So I'm going to go into kind of our particular organization. I know most of you aren't community mental health centers, but I think this does relate and does transfer to everyone, and specifically some information that we found out as part of our grant. And so we're community mental health centers, and how does this apply to community mental health centers? And if any of you are looking for health care, I think it's kind of the same. So we did a study in 2016. We had a third-party organization go in and do a survey of our membership, a very in-depth survey of our membership for what we call the behavioral health technician job. And that is a bachelor's level, entry-level position in community mental health centers that does a variety of things. But that is essentially their entry-level college job, okay? And so we found, not surprisingly, that the majority of these positions were held by millennials, which again is why this is important. Most of these people had been employed for 0 to 3 years, which again are fit with all the research I've been talking about. And this was interesting, and we were kind of almost surprised by this, is most of them enjoyed their work. For those of you that don't have a community mental health center background, this is a very tough entry-level job. In many of our community mental health centers, we're working with the underserved, particularly in rural areas. It's a very high-stress job. There's a lot of productivity requirements involved for state Medicaid funding. I won't get into that in depth, but it's a high-pressure job, and you're dealing with people that have a lot of serious problems. And they're not always, honestly, the easiest people to work with. But most of them enjoyed their work, again, because it has a purpose. So what did this workforce value most according to our survey? Well, good communication, and that was 99.3% valued that. They valued a supportive work environment, 97.4%, and feeling valued, 95.1%. These are the top 3 things that they liked. And the positive aspect of the job, which was, again, really good to see, as it's a service organization, that this is a positive, working with the clients, the coworkers, having a supportive environment, and then we're lucky in that some of our centers have kind of caught on to this. I like to give that all to me because I've been teaching this to them for a long time. Now, being flexible, and they kind of have to be, all right? So what were they dissatisfied in? Well, salary, surprise, surprise, and this is industry-wide thing, productivity expectations, and then work-related stress. I won't go into too much depth on the salary and productivity expectations because that is kind of industry-specific, but this work-related stress thing, that was 63.6%. And in the rural areas, which is what we address, they felt that there was less opportunity for advancement. Most of our CMHCs have a central office in sometimes a rural location itself, and then their satellite offices are even more rural. But so you can see how that goes. So they had less availability of resources and a feeling that they were disconnected from the organization. So what did we come up with? Well, retaining millennials and everyone else, basically communication, and we decided that we needed to increase communication efforts between leadership and employees. And that's like, telling them what they can tell them as frequently as possible, those kind of things. And open communication, those kind of stuff. If possible, again, if we could, try to make productivity adjustments to help reduce the stress. And there's some things here that are, again, fairly specific to our industry, but utilization of paid time off, increased travel time by taking away some of that productivity, because if you got to drive 45 minutes each way to an appointment, that shouldn't count against you. And again, client cancellations, those kind of things. So salary, well, try to modify opportunities for advancement whenever possible. And this one is one that it was interesting because a lot of this had to do with communication, and it's provide career-enhancing training to their employees. And some of our providers are, our upper-level people are like, well, we do provide training. It's like, well, they don't know about it. So again, to continue to provide career-enhancing training to their employees. All right, kind of crank through all this. And you've probably all seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Well, this is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs 2016, with, of course, we can all agree that at the base of that is, of course, Wi-Fi. Any questions? And I've got to show you my last slide.
Paul, this is Cap.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you?
Good, Cap.
Good. It's been a really interesting presentation, and I had a question. On the couple slides back, you were talking about the retaining of millennials, and in particular, the communication piece really caught my attention because, of course, we all try really hard to be great communicators, and I see a bullet like that, I'm like, oh my gosh, well, how much more communication is needed? And one of the things that crossed my mind is this particular group of millennials that you had brought up earlier that struck me is that they really are motivated by that sense of purpose and that the organization is really successful.
Yeah.
So it makes me think that it's not just communicating information to them, it's figuring out how to build or how to have enough probably conversation, but nonetheless figuring out how to really communicate that they're part of a winning organization, and that's part of like dashboard work and presenting your results as an organization, and then really connecting the dots that how they contribute to that winning aspect of the organization.
You're exactly right. And one of our organizations, and it's in a county in Indiana that has one of the highest rates of heroin use in the state. Huge, stressful place. They have a really great team, and they have an employee area where their case workers can get away from, they don't see clients in that area, and they have a huge wall, and it's basically, and I can't remember the cool name they came up with it, but it was like a hero wall, where their supervisors will put things on the wall, that are all HIPAA compliant, of course, but good things that the employees have done. and they celebrate successes on this huge wall. And I talked to the manager of that facility, and they were saying, and most of the people that work in there are millennials, you know, he's saying that they need more people, but they didn't have a huge turnover rate. They were having a hard time finding people, but the people they had were staying, and I saw that, and I was encouraged by that. But yeah, communicating successes and letting them know, even in these remote rural areas, and this place is pretty remote, that they're part of an organization and they're having successes. And the other thing, that one of the ways they communicated success was they did. They have a fairly nice area that's not with the rest of the facility and not accessible to the rest of the facility that they can relax in, and it shows that they're valued. You know, they spent the money. The center spent the money to give them something nice. So I thought that was a good thing. But you're right. We have to pick our channels on how we communicate, and then make sure that we're communicating the value of what the person is doing, even if we can't give them as much money as we'd like to sometimes.
Yep. Great. That's a great example, too. I appreciate that. I can really picture that hero wall, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I see, Kristen, you have your hand up. Or whoever was just talking, go ahead and join in.
Yes, this is Kristen. Well, on that, you were talking about communicating to the millennials a sense of purpose, and I went back to the slide where you had presented the, you know what, I don't know what the title of this section was, but I'm Generation X, and on this slide about Generation X, there were some motivational factors here, flexibility, recognition from the boss, meeting workplace goals. And so I reflected on myself, well, what gives me a sense of purpose in an organization? And at least one factor is that meeting workplace goals. So would the sense of purpose actually be different by generation? For me, it's being able to meet those goals, feeling a sense of accomplishment, and yet I can't assume that my sense of purpose would be the same as someone else's sense of purpose. And then you were just now elaborating on that, where the sense of purpose might be value to an individual, the hero wall, the here we value you, here's a special way we treat you because we value you. But what are the different senses of purpose, and how do those vary?
Well, that's a really good point, and I really that's why I like teaching this class, and I'm writing things down. I honestly have never explored that yet. I mean, I think part of it is, well, I do know part of the answer to that question is that it seems like the millennials and the global seem to be trending this way too, are more of the, as opposed to, you know, workplace goals, to more general social goals, you know, social justice, those kind of things, and how they can affect those particular, that's their sense of purpose, as opposed to having things to do with their particular job. And they try to find jobs where they can obviously blend those two things together. But, you know, and this isn't, I hope this doesn't sound trite, but, you know, most young people believe that they can change the world, and hopefully they can in a positive way, where, you know, by the time we get older, we sometimes don't always have that in the forefront of our minds when we're nearing retirement, that we want to leave it to those folks that are younger than us. But yeah, that's an interesting point, and I'm going to research that more for my next slideshow.
So, Paul, this is Angie. I'm wondering, I'm sorry, does someone else have a question?
That was me, Angie, so go ahead.
Oh, that was you. Okay. I'm wondering, this was all super fascinating information, so thank you for that. I'm wondering, how can we tie this information into student recruitment for our various allied health curriculums, and eventually into, when those students become our new workforce, into recruitment and retention of our new workforce.
Well, that's a really good point, and what we're finding out here with ARC is, and I'll just give you some simple examples, but first of all, again, it's the motivational stuff. For example, one of the things that our executive management at some of our CMHCs thought was a huge draw for that they were advertising heavily was tuition reimbursement. Well, it turned out that was not, when they interviewed their employees, that's not one of the major, that didn't even make the top 5 of benefits, but that was one of the things that that they were pushing. And so how we market our jobs to millennials is we really, really, really have to find out these or be aware of what motivates them, because it's, and we probably all figured out that, if you're talking about your awesome 401k plan to millennials, that's not going to be a huge thing because they're not thinking about that yet. We found that out here at Aspen. We've got employees that, really don't care about that because they're not even thinking about that yet. So taking this information about how to communicate, and that's the other thing. We originally in our grant had targeted some modes of recruitment that after doing a little bit of research, we found out that, and a lot of it had to do with talking to millennials, that we would be wasting our money. And one of the things was Career Builder. We found out, well, most millennials don't use Career Builder to find for recruiting, yet all of our CMHCs were spending a lot of money on Career Builder ads. And so we retargeted, and you've probably heard me talk about this on calls, and we're using digital media. We're exploring some other avenues of recruitment. Some of the things that just weren't on a lot of our boomer-aged management people's screens even. So how the channels to communicate, how they communicate with each other, and then what motivates them, I think, is how this information can translate into successfully recruiting people into our programs. And we've, as I said, we're constantly reevaluating and trying to find the best channels to get our message out to the folks that we need to come work for us. That was a long answer, sorry.
That was great. Thanks, Paul. Does anyone else have a question? We've got about a minute or 2 left. You can press star 2 to unmute your line if you want to talk with us verbally or use the chat box. And while we're waiting for that, I see Marcia's on the line. Marcia, do you have any comments or updates or anything that you want to share?
I don't have any updates. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't have any updates per se. We still are waiting on PIMS to come